Have the center of the Earth. This is like the very core of the Earth where the design crystal bundle is. Then you have like the surface of the Earth where we're living, and then you have the personality sheath. This is all of the personality crystal bundles that are around the Earth. And then out here, you have the stars. So this is the actual constellation. So, Sagittarius, Scorpio, they're the stars that are really far out. That's the sun. So we'll just label those. So if we want to go around the outside here, this is rough, like a rough example of where we could say that the constellations for each of the signs are. But then you could also say that located on the Earth in equal divisions, marked like the seasons, are divisions that correspond. So you can see I'm making a drawing here where all of those lines line up. So that would be like at the beginning of a global cycle. That would be like when tropical astrology was established as the dominant system. At that time, the actual gate locations on the planet where the design crystal bundle and the personality crystal bundle are were aligned with the outside stars. But then, due to the precession of the equinox, where the Earth itself rotates like a spinning top or like your head on your shoulders, the angle of the Earth rotates, and as a result, the perspective of those constellations changes and they no longer align. However, that is temporary because in 27,000 years, that goes all the way around and then it comes back to where it's lined up. And I'm doing it in like 8 here because, whoops. It makes sense for it to be an 8. So that is a larger cycle. Human design is said to be a yin system. It's about the Earth. The stars are very far away, and they're not connected to the Earth and her seasons. And so if one of the systems was to be false in terms of it being a mentally orientated masculine rather than feminine, patriarchal even system, it would be the tropical one because it's disconnected from the Earth, and the Earth is the yin. And it's also like the core is where the design crystal bundle is. So, okay, so question and answer time. Just make it the actual 8. Alright, so we've got the sun over here. This is the sun. And we also have inside our solar system, which is these stars out here, they're very far away. And inside here, closer, we have the planets. So, you could say there's some planets. Whatever, you get the point. The planets are in this section. So for example, when neutrinos are coming to the Earth from the sun, are they coming through here? No, they're not. They're not going out via the gates and then coming back to the Earth. The gates are not located out here. The gates would have to be in between us and the sun in order for a neutrino to be filtered through a gate to then have a certain impact on Earth. That's why when I draw the lines here, this is why we're saying that the gates are paired to the Earth. They're not paired to the stars, because a neutrino it's not going like this. Oops. Well, let's say there's a planet here. It's not going like this. It's not going via the constellation. It's coming via the gate. If there's a planet here, it'll come through whatever gate's there. And those gates there, they're paired to the seasons, which are constant and divided up evenly and don't change. So if you want to say, oh, well, it's misguiding us because the neutrinos are going through a different sign and a different gate, how do you propose that that's happening? How? It just doesn't make like practical, logical sense. The stars are just a marker for a certain point at the beginning of a global cycle. That's it. Question. Well, the neutrino's not coming via the particular sign it says it is in because Mars looks like it's in Scorpio or whatever. As I've said, you're talking about what's out here. You're looking up to the sky, which is a marker of the beginning of the cycle. You're not looking at the design crystal bundle and at the personality crystal sheath. You're not looking down at the Earth. If you're looking up, you'll see really far away this. But what about this? If we're here on the surface of the Earth, the personality crystal sheath is what's between us and the planets. The constellations are not between us and the planets. And alternatively, if you want to image it in a sun-centric rather than an earth-centric way, so that those gates are tied to the ecliptic of the sun, with the same thing, we'd have the constellations way out here, the stars, so it will be the stars out here, and then you could draw the gates along, for example, right close to the Earth, in between it and the sun and any planets. If you divided this up, then the particular angle of the Earth to the stars would be irrelevant if the gates are a system of division that is tied to the sun along that plane, so we could see that as the wheel. And if we were to do that, would actually make sense because it's the movement of the Earth through these four that makes the seasons, well, with the rotational tilt of the axis as well, but the 4 quarters, the 4 seasons are for all intents and purposes divided up that way. A third way to look at it or to understand it is to understand that we have the entire universe like this, and then we have our particular, and this here, this entire universe is a fetus. So it's one, it's all connected. And then, so let's say if it's a fetus and it's like this, say it's like the equivalent of a person, like it's not, but theoretically, just for the purposes of the argument. So this is the entire universe. This is just different parts of the universe, different solar systems. And then let's say this is like our wider, where we're located. And then, so let's say here, we're located in the ajna, right? So let's say we could look at it one way. We could say that our solar system is the ajna, or we could say the earth is the ajna. For the purposes of this discussion, let's say the earth is the ajna. So let's say that this right here is our solar system, remembering that all of this is connected and all of this is connected. The entire contents of the brain and head of the universe as a child in the womb, it's all connected. And then so in here, we have us as the ajna. So let's say hypothetically in this instance that this is the solar system, and which is along the ecliptic of the sun, which is a flat plane. And let's say that flat plane of the universe is divided up into the gates. And so as the earth in 1 year is moving around the sun, it's moving all the way around through the gates. And so are all the other planets. Now, the reason it's important to remember that all of this is connected is because the way the information transfers within an organism is different to the way that information transfers outside of or between separate entities. So as a base level assumption, we're saying this whole thing and also this whole thing are single entities. They're not separate. It's the illusion of separateness exists as part of the mind. So that's something to remember as well. So let's say then let's put the sun in the middle. You could also say the sun is the ajna, but it doesn't really matter for the purposes of the discussion. And so then we've got planets also moving around the sun. So let's say this is Jupiter. It's further out than us. So when you say that the neutrinos from Jupiter are being filtered through the gates to us, if and when we are a single entity, the angle that this little Earth is facing isn't really relevant. In the same way that the baby might be looking this way or the baby might be looking this way, that doesn't change the orientation of the womb. And so in the same way, with when the precession, the angle of this planet tilts, that doesn't change the orientation of the gates within the whole. And so that is also, the interconnectedness is also potentially why even if the location of the specific location just generally doesn't matter, even though it can be explained in terms of where it's located. And so when you're looking at the fetus in the womb of the universe, so we could say that the constellations are out here, and it's just the same thing again. Let's say that goes like across to there. So they're out here, they're divided up, the sky, so we've got Scorpio, Sagittarius, whatever. Well, technically they would be on the inside, wouldn't they? So let's say they're out near, orientating to the lining of the womb of the universe. So yes, when we change the angle that this is facing, if it rotates slightly, it's going to have a different perspective relative to the larger womb in terms of exactly where it sees the constellations. But again, this womb rotating, or the Earth rotating on its axis as the precession to make it look like the womb is moving. It's just a matter of perspective. It doesn't actually change the orientation of the ecliptic of the universe. And it doesn't, technically these aren't changing either. It just looks like that they are from a very, very isolated, minor, small perspective on the surface of the Earth. And so this is why we say that global cycles are important, because that rotation, that 27,000 year rotation, let's put it in red just so we've got a different color, that it's going here, it's just the rotation of the angle of this. That's the global cycles. Which is why they're so important. If you take away, if you make the entire system of human design sidereal, then there is no larger cycle for it to be contrasted against. And so the evolutionary program, the 27,000 year program, not only is it not there, but also you're just making a system that's unstable, because technically you have to change the alignment of where the gates are every single day. And only from a very, very small isolated perspective, like this very small perspective, would that be necessary or wise to do. Only if you look at, like, really we're a speck, like our life in this larger, this 27,000 year cycle here, our life within that is a tiny speck. And so it's a very microscopic perspective to say that because at one certain point of that circle you're facing this way, then the entire system should change, because it ignores that it's a much, much larger, that there's something much, much larger going on, and that this cycle is, like, as a human life, we live 100 years, that's nothing in the terms of the length of this cycle. Yeah, so it's just microscopic and separated, yeah. If you have the stars out here and our solar system in here and Earth here and the sun here, when let's say we're looking at Jupiter and it's over here, because our perspective has changed, so we're rotating around here on the precession, the 27,000 27,000 year cycle, our perspective has changed. So when we're looking at Jupiter, our angle is different, and so when we look at it, we might see a certain a different sign. But that's not the direction that the programming is happening in. The programming isn't happening from the stars via Jupiter to us. The stars are not programming Jupiter to program us. Jupiter itself is programming us, and what we see behind that is just the location within a global cycle. When we have the gates here, they've stayed the same, they haven't changed. We have the gates out here, they started lined up, and then they moved. So, they're 23 degrees offset now. So they're not lined up anymore. But Jupiter is programming us. Jupiter is programming us within this, not within this. When the neutrinos are coming from the sun, they're coming direct here. They're not coming like this. When they're coming within this, not from out here. So the location of these it doesn't change this. It's just not relevant, because they're not programming like this. They're programming like this. And so when you've got the constellations on the outside, and then the solar system, and then the division of the gates within our solar system, and the sun in the middle, and then the earth. So when we're talking about the precession of the equinoxes, what we're talking about is a rotation of the angle of the planet. So that it's like a spinning top rotation. It doesn't actually change the orientation of the solar system as a flat disk. It's a top to bottom, like, really, if we drew it accurately, it's like a rotation like this or whatever. But it doesn't change the absolute location of the solar system or the gates. If we're saying the gates are paired to either the solar system ecliptic or the sun, then it doesn't change them. Alternatively, if we're saying that the gates are paired to the earth, then it definitely doesn't change them, because when the earth rotates, the gates rotate with it. So either the gates are out on a flat ecliptic and we're just rotating left to right at the top on that ecliptic, or the gates are paired to the earth, in which case we rotate and they rotate with us. So the location of the stars, again, it doesn't have bearing. And so when we talk about the seasons and the importance of the seasons and the divisions staying equal, when we look at a human design chart, the G center is where the magnetic monopole is that orientates us in time and space. And when we look at global cycles, these 8 centers, these 8 centers of these 8 gates of the G center are the 8 locks of the global cycle. And when we zoom out, you can see that those are equal divisions. So if we looked at them as seasons, you've got the divisions that are the 4 seasons, but then you've got the mid-season divisions as well. And so when we look at this in terms of the constellations, this is where they line up at the beginning of a global cycle. So this comes back to the idea that that the fetus of the universe, as above, so below. So we've got a G center. It's going to have a G center, and that's going to have its own orientation, and that 27,000-year global cycle rotation is going between these locks and keys. Yeah, so if you want to look at it like as the mathematics of the universe or whatever, there's 8 divisions that line up to 8 divisions. And so if you want to dismiss something like that, you need to have a very good rationale and justification for why. Okay, so here I've made a very crude 3D diagram. Now for the purposes of the diagram, assume that this out here is like the edge of the universe. And obviously they're not spaced exactly like this, but they're different. Some would be in further, some would be out further. But for the purposes of the diagram, let's assume this is the edge of the universe, and these are the stars that are making up and are allocated as constellations. And then let's say that this is just drawn that way just to say it's the limits of our solar system, which is a flat disk like this. And then for the purposes of the argument, let's say this is the sun, that's the earth. We should probably move. Anyway, it's the earth. It's not where it's located at all. And let's say that this little planet is Mercury, or some small planet that's between the earth and the sun. So this question about where are the gates located, whether they're out here, whether they're at the limits of the solar system, or whether they're tied to the sun, or whether they're tied to the earth, is important, because when we look here, so say this here is the axis at the pole of the earth, at the top of the earth. So let's say that's the North Pole. So when we talk about the precession, what we're actually talking about is that this whole thing, that this whole thing, here we go, that it's rotating like this. And so when it rotates like that, what it's facing towards in the sky changes. And then over, a cycle, the precession we're talking about it rotating around like a small circle, like effective, like rotating around in here. For intents and purposes, when we look at it close up, we could say it might be on an angle like this, and then it'll be on an angle like this, let's say 14,000 years later. So that there is the kind of change we're looking at in the Earth. Obviously it's going along the other axis as well. So I'd have to turn this all the way around and then have a look in here, and then we could, anyway, we could say it's rotating. When it's doing that, its view of these is changing. Oops. Its view of where the constellations are, relevant to the planets, like this one just here, is changing. But this axis, the axis that goes back and forwards, that's in this area, or that's in this area, or the gates that are here, they're not changing just because the angle of that little ball is changing. If we look at it again, I've made it a bit bigger. So around the outside, these, we've got the constellations. And then here we have our solar system, and here we have our sun, and here's our Earth, which is currently in a slight leftward tilt for its precession. So when we come back to the idea of looking at the universe as a fetus in the womb unborn, when we've got here, we've got us, the Earth, as the ajna. The G center is off in space, so we could conceive of that here, if this is the G center, so I've drawn it here with roughly those 8 divisions. The G center, those 8 divide up the wheel. So us here as this little top rotating on a slight angle doesn't change the orientation of the G center, where, let's say hypothetically, if we continued with the human metaphor, you've got the ajna up here and the G center down here, so along the bottom here you would have gate 45 here, gate 25 over here. And so, like the seasons, like that gate 25 is the start of spring, at least in the northern hemisphere, where the seasons is that rotation. It's going, what's one I can use? It's going around here, and this is divided, this is divided into 8, and as it's going around here, that's the 8 seasons. In the same way, We have the G center and the orientation of those 8. So our perspective of these, again, because of our little tilt, doesn't change the layout of the entire universe and its development.